Well, here's a fun fact for you. Did you know that nearly 70% of all divorces are initiated by women? Think about that for a minute. Now, ending a relationship is no easy task, and coming to that decision is no easy task either. My guest today, Mike Fink, literally wrote the book on helping women get clarity around making the decision to move forward with divorce. The name of his book is Divorce Decision Decoded: From Anxiety to Clarity. Please welcome my guest today, Mike Fink. Alrighty, it is time to stop hitting snooze and awaken to a life worth being, the fun and inspiring podcast that dives deep into what makes life truly fulfilling. I'm your host, Sue Willoughby, a self-proclaimed badass transformational life coach for women over 40. Join me as I explore the extraordinary journeys of ordinary people who've transformed their lives from the inside out. Tune in weekly to uncover the secrets to smashing through your perceived limits and creating a life that's not just well lived, but totally worth being. Welcome to A Life Worth Being. Today we have a very interesting guest on. I'm here today with Mike Fink. He is a clarity and decision-making expert, and he works with women specifically around the areas of divorce. Mike, welcome to the show today.
Thank you so much, Sue. I'm very happy to be here.
So tell me about this clarity and decision-making, and I'm very interested in that because I think that making decisions myself sometimes is one of the hardest things you can do, whether it's around divorce or around something else. Once that decision is made, I personally feel lighter and easier and like, okay, well, that wasn't so difficult. However, the process of making the decision was difficult. So how do you bring clarity to the decision-making process?
I'm so glad you're the first host who made that comment. And I think that what you mentioned is that, let me jump straight in. There is a natural process that we as human beings go through to make decisions that we feel good about. And what I mean by good about, it's not only knowing what to do, but also the way we feel about that decision with our head, with our heart, with our gut. And I'm going to use this analogy. I have two Rubik cubes in my hand, and for the people who are listening, one is completely jumbled, and the other one is perfectly solved. But the interesting thing, Sue, to think about is that if you look at the jumbled cube, in terms of the color stickers, in terms of the number of smaller cubes, are any cubes missing compared to the cube
No.
that is being solved? No, nothing
Yeah.
is missing, right? So I'm using this analogy to say that in a way, whenever we have to make a tough decision, and I'm going to expand upon the subject,
Sure.
we feel like this jumbled Rubik cube, but we already have within us all the elements. We may not be aware of them, but they're already there to go from the jumbled cube to the solved cube. The difference in what you need to do is to take those pieces, those elements, and apply the proper sequence where you turn things. But once you understand the proper algorithm, you can always go to the perfect solved cube. And what I discovered, and that's why I became a decision-making expert, is that there is actually an algorithm that, if you follow step by step, leads you to always making a decision that not only tells you what to do, but that you feel good on all levels with your head, with your heart, and with your gut. Does that make sense so far?
Yeah, that's fascinating. I love the analogy of the Rubik's Cube, which has always challenged me. And but yeah, I love that. And I love also what you said about the alignment of the head and the heart and the gut. And because I am a coach and I work with horses as my coaching partners.
Okay.
So when my clients are in an arena with a horse, it's a very somatic experience because we do keep so much in our bodies, and our bodies are, all of our cells hold everything that we've ever been through. So I love that you bring that into it and bring in that alignment. So yeah, please tell me more.
Absolutely. So, if I may, I'm going to share my origin story because people say, "Hey, you're a man. How come you decided to work with women? How can you help women?" And I've been in the field of personal development for 2.5 decades. I had programs
Mm,
that help people. It was in a different kind of area. And then I had a personal turning point in my life because, as you are well aware, most likely, our wounds quite often becomes our gifts. And
mhm,
at some point, I got into a business relationship that was a 50-50 business partnership. So it was not an intimate marriage or an intimate relationship, but nevertheless, it was a very intense relationship because you spend a lot of time when you work. And
mhm.
the entire relationship lasted 10 years. The first 5 years were great, but the last 5 years were absolute hell. And the reason is that after 5 years, the market changed. We needed to make some adjustments. And that's when it became very clear that we had a different vision, that our values, instead of converging, were diverging, that we wanted
Mm,
to do things differently. And obviously, that created a lot of friction, arguments, up to the point that we're screaming in front of our top level employee, which I felt ashamed after that. I mean, it was really, really, really bad. And that lasted 5 years and it got worse and worse. But one of the things that I realized at that point was that the real problem that I was facing wasn't so much that I was in a quote unquote bad relationship. The biggest problem that was affecting me on a daily basis was that I didn't know what to do about it. It was indecision. And
mm.
I'll tell you that if I had not experienced it myself and how debilitating it could be, I would not believe that it could affect you negatively in so many areas of your life. And I'm kind of jumping ahead, but this is the parallel for women who are considering divorce is that, yes, they may be in an unfulfilling or downright unhappy relationship, but the real problem that they're facing is what to do about it. Should I
Yeah.
stay or should I go? And this not knowing what to do because they fear making a mistake that will regret is the thing that spins in the back of their mind that keeps them awake at night. I used to lie awake at night asking myself, is it me? Is it him? Is it the relationship? Am I wrong? Is he right? Well, what if I'm right? But even if I'm right, and if I pull the trigger, it means I will have to start from scratch. I will have to buy him out. Am I going to be able to make it by myself? It's going to cost me a lot of money. All those thoughts.
Yeah.
And it lasted 5 years, which came down to a burnout because indecision affects your life on a level of the mental focus, on your emotions, the stress, the anxiety. It affects your sleep, your energy level, your work, your social relationships, your self-esteem. It's like
Yes.
I'm a smart guy. I should be able to figure it out. I'm in the field of personal development, right? And all those things. And in the case of women who are considering divorce, it also affects the way they interact with their children because quite often what I hear is that they are not able to be fully present and authentic with their kids because in the back of their mind there's always this kind of dialogue. Should I stay? Should I go? Can I really let them know? How is it going to impact them? And this becomes something that erodes their quality of life. Indecision,
Mhm.
I compare that to chronic pain. Some days are worse, some days are better, but overall, your quality of life is miserable and it gets worse over time. Does that make sense so far?
Yes, it does. It really does, and especially when you talk about, when children are involved in a relationship, and in your case, it was a business relationship, but the children were the employees and the customers and everything. I mean, all whatever you're going through, that you're struggling with has a ripple effect. So yes, absolutely.
Absolutely. And I'm really glad you brought that up, and I'm going to expand on that in a moment. So, what happened is after 5 years, things got worse and worse and worse. I didn't see a way out. I had physical issues. I burned out. I had anxiety, sleepless nights. And then I hit my 50th birthday. And I did a life review. And I looked at all the decisions that I had made in my life. And I realized that I got most of them right, except for a couple of them. And one of them was having gotten into this 50-50 relationship without having applied my process for some reason. And when I
Ah,
finally decided to apply my own medicine, I went from this state of being anxious, confused, depressed to all of a sudden, now I know
mm,
what to do. It was this state of clarity. My head was aligned with my heart, with my gut. I knew that the right decision was to end the relationship. But at that point, even though I had to face challenges because I had to sell an asset to buy him out, it left him financially depleted. I had to negotiate the terms and so on. I just knew deep within myself that it was the right thing to do. I was a transformed person from a mess. I went to being this Zen-like person. Even my employee told me, or my spouse, "You look different. What happened?" And I said, "You know what? I have clarity." So I finally separated from him. And then I thought, this is really powerful. This is really interesting. And at that time, my brother-in-law was a doctor and he had to make some very important decisions in terms of his medical career. And he had been thinking about it for 2 long years and he was lost. He was confused. It was to the point that he was having anxiety attacks, nausea. When he was thinking about it, he wanted to vomit. He had made Excel spreadsheets. He
My.
had tried everything he knew and nothing worked. And I thought, let me try my new and improved process. And I took him and I did a session. And in 2 hours, he went from being confused and anxious to have absolute clarity and certainty. And he told me, Mike, it was as if I had been in this pitch dark room, bumping against furniture and suddenly you turn on the light and now I can see clearly and I know where I'm supposed to go. And he tried ever since. And at that point I said, okay, this is really powerful. I put my finger on something incredible. I need to share it with the world. How can I help more people? And the reason I decided to help women considering divorce is because in a way, I had gone through the pain of divorce myself. It wasn't a personal divorce, but it was very close to what you feel in terms of the problems. And also, the methodology that I developed is very, very powerful for tackling complex, meaning there's a large number of variables, and high stakes, meaning cost of failure is very high decisions. And
Mhm.
divorce is certainly one of those incredibly hard decisions to make because if you get it wrong, the costs are massive. It affects not only you, but your children, your spouse, your family, people around you. It affects you on all fronts: emotional, social, psychological, financial, professional. It affects you for years to come, or maybe for the rest of your life. And you don't get do overs. I mean, technically, yes, you could divorce and get remarried, but once you pull the trigger, it's pretty much irreversible. And what's different about the decision to divorce is that it has such high stakes and it's so complex that people are frozen in the status quo, thinking about it. Years go by, decades go by. And one of the things that I have discovered is that people think they are at liberty to make a decision, but they're not because there's a biological reason that keeps you frozen in the status quo. So let me
Hmm.
show you this mock up of the brain. We
Okay.
don't have just one brain, we have three brains. And for people who are listening, just imagine that your brain is like an ice cream cone that has three scoops on top of it.
Sounds delicious.
Yeah, that's in a way how our brain is. And the first scoop of ice cream on top of the cone is what is called the primal brain, the old brain, the reptilian brain. You probably have heard this term before.
Hmm.
Now, the next scoop of ice cream on top of it, the second layer in our brain, is the emotional brain. And the last layer, the last scoop, is the rational brain, the neocortex. And I'm going to talk more about that in a moment. But the important thing to understand is that the primal brain is in charge of your survival. And it says, you know what? When in doubt, if the consequences of getting it wrong are so high, wait it out. I'd rather stay with the devil that I know than with the devil that I don't, because at
Yeah.
least, even though you may be miserable, but I know you can survive. Yeah, no, ooh, I don't know. So from a very strong evolutionary point of view, our brain is geared to keep us in the status quo. And also, we think, you know what, I'm thinking about it. And it's human psychology, it's human nature. Because once you make a decision, unless you have absolute certainty, but you will face the consequences. First of all, a divorce, things get worse before it gets better. It's like renovating a bathroom. You have to tear it down before you can rebuild it and make it more beautiful.
Good analogy there. Yeah.
That's right. And then, if you make the decision and you get it wrong, you expose yourself to the risk of guilt feelings, your children blaming you, you blaming yourself. I mean, messing up. That's when the rubber meets the road. Whereas when you stay into the space, I'm still thinking about it. Technically speaking, you have not made a mistake. You cannot be blamed for anything, right? Even though
Right.
years of life go by. And this is, in a way, the terrible dilemma where most women find themselves is that they are stuck in a status quo, thinking that there may be hope that their relationship will improve. There may be a sign from the universe that will let them know what to do. But the reality is that their primal brain keeps them stuck and they will not be able to make a decision unless they have certainty. So the antidote,
Certainty is something, I mean, yeah, that certainty it's a hard one, right? Because it's like you said, once you start the ball in motion, it's going to go. And honestly, there really isn't any certainty. The only certainty that's going to happen is you will eventually get divorced, like you said, right?
well,
Um,
that's an
and I
interesting.
think, like you said, staying stuck is more comfortable than being uncomfortable, not knowing what is going to happen. Other than once you make that decision, stuff's going to happen.
That's right. Now, if you remember, I told you about the Rubik's cubes, and I found that there is a
Yeah.
way to go and apply an algorithm to all the elements within yourself to find the proper solved cube and the solution. And what I did find is that uncertainty is the issue, is the real cause, and our brain keeps us stuck there. That's the cause of the status quo. And if the
Mhm.
antidote is certainty, then how can you actually get certainty? Now, I will tell you that you may have heard or you may know some women who decided to divorce and they were certain about it from the get go. They had no fear of regret. They just moved through that and they were done. And this is a small percentage of people. And the reason it happened that way is because in those relationships, what I call an instant deal breaker happened. And
Hmm.
it's completely subjective. For some people, maybe it was my husband cheated on me. To me, that's completely unacceptable. I'm done. For some others, it could be my husband took the money that was the college fund for the kids. He gambled it. He lost it all in the casino. That's that's it. Or he did drugs, or what? Or he became physically abusive. Whatever that is. And again, it's highly subjective, but it's something happens that it's absolutely not acceptable to the person, and that person has the certainty that, you know what, I know for a fact that staying in the relationship will be worse. And in that case, the primal brain agrees. It says, yes, you're better off moving forward because I want to protect you, and because of this thing that happened, you are better off moving forward. But for most women, unfortunately, that's not the case. In fact, I have a lot of clients who tell me, I wish my husband or my spouse was a jerk. And it is
Right. Yeah,
paradoxical.
because it's not comfortable, but it's not 100% uncomfortable. It's not where they want to be. And I mean, I think that happens not just in divorce, but in life, in jobs, in whatever.
Exactly. Because if the spouse was a jerk, they would have that certainty that would enable them to move forward.
Yes.
So, how do you get that certainty? I found that there are really three big steps. The first one is you need to gather all the pieces of the puzzle. And it may sound obvious, but most people, if you have 200 pieces out of a 1,000 pieces jigsaw puzzle, it's very unlikely that you are going to be able to figure what the puzzle or the picture on the puzzle is supposed to be. And yet, most people are not aware of all the things that are important to them. I remember this client, her name was Felicia, and her husband had cheated on her several times, even though he was in a sex addiction support group to supposedly help him. He had kept on cheating, so she was devastated. But
Yeah.
on the other side, he was an amazing dad. And for her,
Mm.
the whole issue was, I cannot do this anymore. He cheated on me, but he's an amazing dad. Her world had narrowed down to those two things that were conflicting, and she was going in circles. And
Yes.
the fact that we're not considering all the variables happens quite often when there is a phenomenon that I call being blinded by the intense, meaning that maybe your spouse has a specific quality that is so incredible. Maybe they're a fantastic provider or a great lover or incredibly affectionate or such a great parent, something that is so extraordinary that you kind of forget about the rest. And the reality is that you need to actually take a step back and ask yourself, what is it that is really important to me, not to what society tells me, not to what my family tells me, what is important to me in my relationship, in my ideal partner. And when you start digging, maybe you want somebody who maybe is a good communicator, who likes to travel, who shares their household chores, or who's physically affectionate, whatever that is. But in my experience, most people have between 20 to 30 things that they need to consider in their relationship to be able to judge it. Does that sound like a lot, Sue?
So
20 to
yeah,
30?
I mean, 20 or 30 I mean, but so it's kind of like a pros and cons list, right? Which one kind of sort of is that what we're
It
well, let's
starts. It
see.
starts with a list of pros and cons. So that's a perfect comment that you just made. So if for your listeners, if you think that 20 to 30 sounds like a lot, it is a sign that you're missing critical pieces. But this
Mm,
is just step number one, because as you so brilliantly pointed out, if you just know what's important to you, then you're stuck in the pros and cons. Well, he has this, but what about that?
yeah.
And what's the way out? Well, the way out is step number two, which is creating order from chaos, which means ranking your values from the most
Mhm.
important to the least important. Know what's more important versus less important, and then distinguishing further between what is essential versus optional. And I'm going to ask you a question, which is a small thought experiment. Imagine that you are looking for your dream house, and there are 20 things that are important to you in your house. And is it because you're looking for a dream house that you're laughing?
No, it's because I'm also a licensed real estate agent, and so when
There
I
you
go
go.
through this I go through this little thing with my clients as well, or I have in the past. It's like, okay, let's get your giant
Wish
wish
list.
list together, right? Of all the things that you want, and then we can narrow it down to like what you can really afford. No,
And
but yes, yeah. So
this is a
go
very
ahead.
smart approach, because at least you understand that people make decisions based on what's important to them. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, a lot of people don't have that internal clarity of knowing with various great specificity what is important to them. So going back to that example, let's imagine that you are looking for a dream house, and there are 20 things that you're looking for. And a friend of yours comes a couple of weeks later and says, Sue, I'm so excited. I have found your dream house. He has 19 things out of 20 that you're looking for. Is that a
Yeah.
good thing or a bad thing?
Well, you want my answer to that?
Yes.
It depends on what that one thing is. Is that one thing the thing that's at the top of my list, or the one thing that's at the bottom of my list? Like, oh, doesn't have a trash compactor. Well, I don't really care about that, right?
Perfect answer. I mean, you are so on top of it. And that's exactly that. If it's something that's optional, it doesn't matter. But what
Right.
if the house is in a different city and state where you want to live?
Hmm.
Everything else becomes a moot point. It doesn't matter that you had 95% of the thing. So I have this saying that values are not an equal vote to democracy, they are a military hierarchy.
Hmm.
It doesn't matter how many are fulfilled, it doesn't matter. What matters is which ones are fulfilled.
Yes. Yes.
And this is important because if you don't know, if you don't have that distinction between essential and optional, then you don't know what you can and cannot compromise on. In fact, one of the things that I say is that marriage counseling, in a way, it's putting the horse before the cart, because first you need to have clarity as to what's essential and optional, because otherwise you risk working on things that are optional and it makes things worse. Maybe your spouse will make improvements, but if it's on things that at the end of the day are not the real needle movers, it will make things worse, because now he has made efforts. And if you still are not happy and decide to move forward, you feel even more guilty. Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
They're in the wrong direction. Yes.
Right.
Uh-huh. Yeah. No, that makes total sense. Yeah, and
So
when you put it into these very simple terms, it's like, oh, okay. So sometimes we're like with your example with your client where he's cheated on me 75 times, but he's a great dad. It's like, well, okay, what's more important to you?
that's right. And the reality is that it's not that easy unless you have a structured process to really pit
Right.
one value against the other. But it's a series of simple steps, just like the Rubik Cube. It's simple to turn one face and another one, right? But
Yeah.
it's the cumulative effect of those simple steps. So I want to share the story of this client, Kate, who was in a relationship. She'd been married for many years. I think it was 25 years. And for the previous 5 years, she had been struggling with the decision, should I stay or should I go? And when I guided her through the process of understanding all the things that are important to her, in which
Mhm.
order, what's essential, what's optional, what came up is that her husband actually fulfilled 70% of the things he was looking for in her ideal mate.
Hmm.
And at first glance, you could say, well, okay, well, that's not a bad marriage.
Yeah.
But when you have the distinction, which we came up, that she had 14 values that were essential to her, and 9 out of 14 were not fulfilled. And most of all, 4 out of the top 5 were not.
Mm.
It became obvious that, yes, a lot of things were fulfilled, but not the things that mattered. And at
Yeah.
that point, she was able to have the certainty that, you know what? Could my husband make changes? Possibly, if he's really motivated, but on 9 things or even on 5 things, he may need a personality transplant. That's the expression they use, right? So
Do,
she
do they
realized it was
do
not.
those?
Say that again.
That's a business that you'd want to get into. Personality transplant.
There
There
you
you
go.
go.
Exactly, exactly. So having had this distinction, it enabled her to have the certainty that, you know what, I'm better off moving. Now, there's a third element, which is also very important, which is now that you have logical certainty, we said it's not only about what to do, but it's also about how you feel about what to do. And it's communicating that logical certainty to that part of your brain, the primal brain that has kept you
Mhm.
stuck in the status quo. Because there are so many women who tell me, my therapist tells me that I should divorce, but my marriage counselor thinks I should divorce, but. And it's either because the opinion comes from values that are not their own values, so it's an outside opinion, but sometimes they agree logically with the counselor, but not emotionally. So, how can we communicate that logical certainty to the other parts of ourselves, our heart and our gut? And this is where the brain comes back into play. So, we have 3 brains. So, again, let's go back to the ice cream analogy. The bottom scoop is the old brain, the primal brain, the reptilian brain, and it was formed about 500 million years ago. That's why it's called the old brain.
Yes, I
The
would say so.
emotional brain was formed about 200 million years ago. And the last part, the one on top of it, the neocortex, the rational brain, the one in charge of logical thinking and of language, was formed 2 to 3 million years ago. So, why am I sharing those statistics? Because there's a very profound implication. The part of the brain in charge of language was formed 2 to 3 million years ago. The primal brain and the emotional brain were formed way before we developed language as human beings, which means, Sue, that your primal brain and your emotional brain do not understand language. They
Hmm.
do not understand words. And question for you, what do all the traditional solutions, whether it's therapy or marriage counseling, what do they have in common?
Conversation.
Yes,
And yeah,
they're all
it's
language
talk
based.
therapy. Yeah.
Exactly, talk therapy. It even is spelled in the name. So that's why there's a disconnect between what you know logically and what you feel about that decision. Now,
Mhm.
if words is not the proper way to communicate, what is the proper way to communicate? So let me ask you this: do you have children?
I don't personally know.
Um, do you have a spouse?
I have animals.
Do
Does
you
that
have
count?
animals? Okay. Okay. Let's
Well,
do this.
let me get because like you're saying that the as I mentioned previously, I work with horses in my coaching practice, and we rely very heavily on nonverbal communication because
Aha.
horses are in the moment and in their bodies, and that's how they communicate is non-verbally, right? They don't talk. You can talk all day to a horse and they're like, okay,
Exactly.
but I'll give you my message non-verbally. So that's what we rely on. So yeah, go ahead.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful because you had that in your own experience. Now, there are
Yeah.
several ways to communicate non-verbally, right? You have the sense of smell, you have the sense of touch, you have a vision, and so forth. So, what is one way that is very, very efficient and effective? So, let me guide you through a thought experiment because it will also be a way to guide your listeners through a thought experiment. Now, I'm going to take the example of having a child being bullied at school in your mind to make the experiment, you can think about having one of your animals being, bullied or physically abused by another person. Okay.
Yes.
So obviously you would be very upset, right? So
Yeah.
just when I say child being bullied, just
Yes.
imagine animal. But that
Defensive.
okay,
Yes.
obviously you would be very upset. But what I want to do with this experiment is show you that I'm going to give you 4 different ways for you to find out the same exact piece of information. And let's find how the way I reveal that to you affects the way you feel about it. So, scenario
Okay.
number one, a person comes and tells you your child is being bullied at school or your animal is being physically
Right.
abused,
Yeah.
but you don't know what the perpetrator looks like. You would
Hmm.
be upset, correct?
Yeah. Oh, yes, absolutely. Because it's like that mama bear thing. I'm going to go to bat. I'm going to get defensive. Where is it? Let me at that thing, that person that's bullying my kid. Yeah.
Second way where it's being revealed to you, a person comes and tells you verbally your kid is being abused and bullied at school, but this time you know what the perpetrator looks like. How is
Hmm.
your level of upset? Less, equal, or
I
more?
would have to say it depends because if I know that the person is, let's say my kid is kind of, a little nerdy or whatever, and it's my little dog and it's being bullied by a Rottweiler, then, I'm going to be like, okay, well, it's a little scary.
Mhm.
So I would have a different reaction maybe, and
Okay,
maybe I would have a better understanding, or I don't know. So,
but it
it would
does.
give me more information to clarify. So,
Correct. Now, let's say that you just know only what they look like, but nothing else.
okay.
Okay. So, third scenario, a person comes and shows you pictures of your child being abused, physically bullied at school. How is
Mhm.
your level of upset now? Lower, equal, or higher?
If I actually saw what was happening,
If you saw
I
images, pictures,
if I saw a picture of that my child being bullied,
right?
I it probably would give me more information and it would probably make me madder because if I would actually see what was going on, depending on what the photo revealed. I don't
And
know.
last way to reveal that information, you go to school, you drive to pick up your child, and then you witness in front of your eyes another child physically bullying your child. How is your level of upset now when you witness it live?
I like to take the little rugrat and slam him against the wall, probably. Well, now
So,
because now it's a tactile thing. I'm actually seeing something. I'm feeling what my child is feeling. I'm there. I'm experiencing it myself. So it's going to turn up the volume for me.
you put it in such a beautiful way, right? And this is what I was trying to convey is that it's the exact same piece of information, yet
Hmm.
on an emotional level, you felt it so much more the more you had an ability to visualize what was happening. So
Hmm.
first scenario, you just heard about it. Second scenario, you knew what the other person looked like, so that enabled you to kind of visualize it better. Third scenario, you had images, and fourth, you're seeing it live. And when you said it your words, it's when you see it that you feel it.
Yeah.
And this also explains how has it ever happened to you to watch a movie and you logically know it has a happy ending. But while
Hmm.
the movie goes through the struggles, one example that I use because it's quite a famous movie, it's The Notebook. You know that Noah and Ali will just be together and love each other, but
Yeah.
during the movie, there's the struggles, and you go through those moments where you feel the anxiety, you feel the fear, right? Yet
Yeah.
logically, well, doesn't make sense. I know they're going to be happy. It's only when your primal brain and emotional brain see it happening on screen that they hug each other, they kiss each other, they're together, that it feels it. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yeah.
So this is beyond just trivia because it has a very practical application. The way to communicate your logical certainty in terms of what to do regarding your relationship is to display an assessment of your relationship visually so that all parts of your brain understand it. So I have
Yeah.
created what I call the decoding grid, where you take all the values that have been ranked from most important to least important. Then there's a visual contrast between the area of the values that are essential versus optional. And then I use color coding to assess each value, whether it's being fulfilled or not. And the
Hmm.
person will go and say, you know what? Value number one, it's a red. Value number two, it's a blue. It's acceptably fulfilled. Number three, it's a red. It's a red. Number four, it's a green, and so on. And what you come up with is a full picture of the entire relationship that considers the 20 to 30 variables because that's another advantage of using the visual channel, is that you can process a large number of variables at once. And all of a sudden, you have a visual assessment of the health of your relationship that you can also process beyond the logical. It's not even what the words are of the values. It's just, you see, is my essentials area in the red zone or in the green zone?
Hmm.
What are the points of adjustment? And when you see that visually, you process it at a much deeper level. Does that make
Hmm.
sense?
Yes. So if red is something that you place, let's say, a high value on, and like there's either not enough red or there whatever. I mean, so the colors represent, so you can see in the spectrum where things fall. Is that what I'm understanding?
Actually, let me express myself better. What I use the colors for is to rate each value. So let's say that number one is physically affectionate.
So
If you're
that's a high value item,
Yeah,
right?
number
That's
one,
very
and you
important.
go to every single value and you rate it. And the way you rate it, you assess it, is by putting a red dot, a blue dot, and I also use symbols because it's a green dot with a check mark, because the check mark is the symbol that is associated with yes, it's good. And
Okay.
on the other hand, if you put a red dot with an exclamation mark, it's like, oh, attention, green is
Gotcha.
go, red is no go. It's
Yeah.
stop, right?
Gotcha.
So that's
Okay. Gotcha.
and blue is more of a neutral thing. And this enables you to have a real holistic picture of the relationship. Now, the reason I'm bringing this up is because I had this client, her name was Kim. Obviously, I'm using not their real names to
Sure.
protect
Yeah.
privacy, but she'd been married for 25 years and she had been struggling with the decision whether to leave or go, to stay
Right.
or go for the previous 3 years because she had met another man, she had had an affair. Now, I didn't judge at all. She was making the best possible decision she could make at the time, but she was completely confused. She didn't want to break her family. Her older son knew about the affair. He wanted his mom to be happy, but he couldn't keep lying to his dad. So, and the other man with whom she was having an affair had divorced his wife and was waiting for her to divorce. It
Hmm.
was a nightmarish
That's a
situation.
lot of factors.
And she knew that no matter what she would do, she would hurt people and it would be a big mess. And
Yeah.
she was stuck in the status quo. So you think, how do you resolve this? And that was where the process came into play, because I helped her gather all the pieces of the puzzle, rank them in order of importance, distinguish between essential and optional. And then this visual evaluation, when she assessed just her spouse, it became so clear that, the majority of the values that were important to her, I think it was 8 out of 12 or something along those lines, were in red in the essential area.
Hmm.
He also had a lot of reds in the optionals area. And when she saw all that red pretty much everywhere, she realized, you know what? My relationship with my husband is never going to work, regardless of me having met the other man. She was
Right.
able to understand and assess her relationship on its own merits. And then what was
Yes.
more
Yeah.
striking, because that's important, right? You don't want
That's
to
what
be
I
wondering, is it
Well, that's
because
what
I
I was just gonna say. You got to take that other person out of the equation, because that was just something that happened. That was like, okay, well, that happened. I have to look at why that happened. Okay, that was, clearly there's something going on with my primary relationship that allowed that to take place. And so, but now we need to look at the primary relationship and figure out why that's not working, that caused or that allowed that affair to actually happen. So yes, I agree. Take that person out of the relationship, because
you
that
are so good at summarizing and synthesizing.
sorry.
No wonder
I'm
you're
all
great.
about the bullet points.
So once we had assessed her primary relationship, and she knew for a fact that it was an assessment that was detached from the other, from having met the other man, the next logical question was, well, what about the other man? Is he a good match or not, right? Or is he just like
Yeah.
marginally better, but still better than what I'm living? And when she assessed him, it turned out he was agreeing on pretty much
Hmm.
all the values. And when we put them side by side, it was so obvious to her what the right choice was, because she could see it, and then she knew it not only logically in a way she could explain in words, but also emotionally and intuitive, like, yeah, now I know. And that was the end of her 3 years of confusion and anxiety. She still took the time to process and digest, just to let it sit.
Yeah.
But then she went to talk to her husband, and she had a very calm conversation. She used to be afraid of confrontation, but now she was so clear. She had such a certainty, and she was able to explain to him that they were simply not a good fit. It's not that he was
Mhm.
a bad person. It's just
Yeah.
like, the analogy that I use is, imagine that you buy a beautiful pair of shoes, but it turns out that it's half a size too small and it hurts your feet. It's not
Right.
that bad shoe, you're half size too small. It's not bad foot, you're half size too big. It's, your shoe is beautiful, your foot is okay, it's just not a good fit.
Just not a good
She was
fit.
able
Right.
to explain that to her husband because she had the certainty that the relationship couldn't work. She was able to avoid the aggravation of trying to work things out with marriage counseling and so on, because he was trying to dissuade her, but she had that certainty, that clarity, because she understood exactly what was working, what wasn't working, and she knew it logically, emotionally, and also at a visceral level. And this is what enabled her to move forward. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. Yeah. I think it's great. And like you said, it takes that other person out of the equation. It takes it gets beyond the emotion so
Mhm.
that you can, and it's not just like a math problem because it is emotional, it is physical, it is all of those things. But when you can break it down and say, okay, this, like you said, you're not a bad person, you're just not the person for me, or you're not the right fit. It's kind of like what, when you're young and you're like, oh, it's not you, it's me, right? But
Mhm.
and in essence, that's what we're saying, right? We're not saying it's not you, it is me. And it's the fact that I've looked at what I want, what I need, what I value, and that is not there with you. I'm sorry, but time to go. Bye.
Correct. Yeah, that's a perfect summary of that. So I still have some other things I could share, and I know time is running by. How much more time do we have? So I want to make sure that we provide the most in the amount of time.
Yeah, I mean, I love all of the things that you said, and I think it's really, I think one thing I'd love to know is kind of how, when someone comes to you, and I know that we are, like I said, we can go as long as we want, but um, when someone comes to you, right, have they tried other things? How long does this process take for you to work with someone to get them to that point where they can figure things out and understand what is really happening, to get that clarity? And I know there's probably all over the board, but
No, actually, it's a great question, and I usually tell my clients that I can get them clarity and certainty in 30 days or less,
that's
because once you
good.
know how to solve the Rubik cube and you are an expert at how to move the different faces of the cube, you can solve it very quickly. The process is very structured, and then it depends. If I'm working one on one with them, it could be within literally a couple of weeks, the time to do the
Hmm.
steps, to guide them through the steps. If it's a done with you format where they do some parts by themselves, it usually takes 4 weeks or less, because it's very structured, it's very precise, and most of all, it is based on what is important to them and what resonates with them. I'm not the one telling them what to do. And I also want to mention, by the way, Sue, because it is an important point, a lot of women that I work with end up divorcing because that's the nature of the relationship, the
Hmm.
relationship. But this process can also help you save the relationship and know beforehand if you have a chance to saving it. Because if you pinpoint that,
Ah,
now I understand why I'm unhappy. It's because I have 15 things that are important to me, but number two, number three, and number six are not fulfilled. Well, if you have 3 out of 15, there's more chances that your spouse may be able to work on those, right? So
yeah.
not only do you have clarity as to whether it's more likely that you can save it, but you also understand what the leverage points are for you to focus on to make it happen. So clarity can be achieved very quickly once you understand the algorithm to get there.
It's all about the algorithm. Yeah.
Yes,
TikTok, Instagram, relationships. It's all about
not that kind of
all
algorithm.
about the algorithm. I had to bring tech into there somehow. Yeah. No, I really like that. And I think that I like what you said about, yes, sometimes, the majority of people will say, okay, yes, it isn't working and this is why. However, the other side of the coin is like, it's not working right now, but it is salvageable. And I do want to salvage it and what can be done. And I'm also wondering if by getting that clarity, about how they feel about the other person, or how that other person, can they also get clarity about themselves? Perhaps they it's not the other person's problem. Does that make sense?
That's a great point. And there's actually a
I'm just
couple
curious because
yeah.
sometimes we put everything on everyone else when maybe we're the ones that
So
need.
that's a great point, and it's almost a philosophical debate. And here's my take on it, which is what you feel is what you feel. You
Right.
cannot change what you feel. Now, maybe somebody could come and tell you you should feel differently. So it's not a question of trying to change the way you feel, except in very small circumstances. Maybe you are extremely sensitive, and every time your husband or a spouse talks to another person, another woman, you feel triggered and you have
Yeah.
jealousy. And yet, logically, you agree, well, there's no reason, they were just talking, but you get triggered emotionally. In that case, that's one of the few instances where it would make sense to understand and to try to diffuse the trigger. But besides that, what you feel is what you feel.
Right.
So the reason I'm saying this is because now values do change over time, but who you are today is who you are today. What you feel is what you feel. And this is why it's important to understand whether that value is essential versus optional. Now, having said that, there's still some hope, and I'm going to give you a couple of strategies because that's actually also part of the process. Once you kind of have diagnosed and assessed your relationship and see, first of all, you focus on the essentials area, you ignore the optionals because the optionals by definition are optional. And then if you judge that, there may be a chance to salvage the relationship within the essentials area, you want to whittle down the number of required changes from your spouse as much as possible because changing is hard by nature, right?
Hmm. Yeah.
And there are two strategies that I provide. One is called outsourcing. And I have this example about this client. Her name was Tracy. Actually, no, that was, I'm using fake names, quote unquote, to protect their privacy, but her name was Taylor. That's the name that I use for her.
Not
And
Swift. Taylor Swift. I'm not talking
no,
about
no.
her.
So
Just kidding.
Taylor was a storyteller. And she would always feel the need when she would come home to share everything that happened in her day with her husband.
Oh
And she
boy.
would go on and on and on. And her husband, unfortunately, had ADHD. So he could not
Oh.
really focus. He was not a good listener.
Uh-huh.
Now, you could say to Taylor, well, you should understand he has ADHD. That, yeah, she could understand it, but she would still feel that her need for feeling listened to
Right.
was not fulfilled. But I helped her explore, and she found a way to outsource the fulfillment of this need, of this value, by scheduling lunches with her female friends who were great listeners. So 2 or 3 times a week, they would get together. She would
Yeah.
share everything. She would just pour her heart out. And then when she would come home, she would have her listening cup filled enough so that she wouldn't need to have her husband listen to her. Now, in an ideal world, yes, her husband would have been the one, but there was one way to
Yeah.
work around that.
No,
So
I think that's a good compromise for
yeah,
sure.
so that's one way. Another one is what I call insourcing. So that client was Tracy, who wanted a spouse who was tidy. And she would get very, very upset because he would leave the dishes 3 days in the sink. He would just drop his clothes on the ground, never put them in the laundry basket, and so on. And that would drive her mad. And she would nag him to try to be more tidy, to wash the things, and so on. It was driving her nuts, right?
Yeah.
Now, again, what you feel is what you feel. But the way we worked around that is it was kind of a double thing. First of all, when she distinguished between essential and optional, she realized that out of 22 things that she valued in a relationship, tidy was number 21 out of 22. It blew her mind. She has been spending so much time on things that didn't matter.
On something that was really low on the totem pole. Yeah.
Exactly. But she hadn't realized it because she felt unhappy in the relationship. And we are not very good as human beings at understanding our emotions. So what she did is she misattributed the negative emotion to the most obvious environmental clue. She saw the clothes on the floor. Oh, that must be the reason why I'm upset. She saw the dishes in the sink. That must be the reason why I'm upset. But there were other reasons. But when she
Yeah.
understood, okay, this is optional, she understood, okay, no need for me to knock him. And then that's where the second strategy that she could apply was insourcing, meaning she took care of tidying the house by herself. Because, yes, ideally she would want a tidy spouse, but what she really wanted was a tidy house.
Yeah.
Yes, it meant for her to do it more, but she could expect and do tit for tat. And at her husband, she would say, I'll do all the cleaning, I'll do all the washing. That's okay. You don't have to think about this anymore. And in exchange, you can do that. So that was a way to kind of fulfill her value. But again, it didn't change the fact that if he had dropped the things on the floor, she would have
Yeah.
felt
But she
somehow.
had a better understanding of how that was really important or not important to her, and she wasn't transferring it to him anymore.
Correct.
And
Correct.
it's like, okay,
Correct.
that's my OCD. I'll just pick the stuff up and do the dishes and whatever else.
There you
Hey.
go. So this is applicable in some instances, not in no, not in all. If you think about physical intimacy, outsourcing it might be more of a challenge unless
Yeah.
are into an open relationship kind of mode. But it's definitely some of
But
the
that
things that
works too for some people. So
for
yeah.
some people it does, right? So it all goes back to having the clarity and knowing yourself. It's not about trying to hide your needs. It's about understanding in the first place what your needs are and then see what is the best way that I can have them fulfilled. And maybe some I can take care of myself or outsource them. But what about the ones that my spouse has to be the one, and can he fulfill them or not? And once you have that level of clarity, you can make a decision with certainty. And if you use if you use the visual display, then your all parts of your brain are on board, and then you are able to move forward with your decision because you can explain it to yourself, to your kids. You put words onto everything that you felt, and your primal brain says, "Okay, now I get it. My best way to protect you is
Yeah.
for you to move forward, rather than stay in a relationship where you'll always be miserable."
It's all very logical and it all makes sense. And I can also see how it can be very applicable to other things, other
Yeah,
decisions as well, like the house, right? Buying the house or
yeah,
buying the new car or just anything, business or making any kind of decisions. And I really I like that. It also, I mean, because I think the clarity piece is huge because there there are so, and I mean, and we're so inundated with data these days and just information in general. I mean, it's just can really muddy a decision making process. Analysis paralysis, right? And when it comes down to it, it's like, what is really valuable and important to us, to you, to me, to whatever, and how does it relate to this decision and this thing that I'm trying to do by work with person, whatever it is. So yeah, I love that. That's fantastic. Thank you for all that. I love the Rubik's Cube, and for those of you who are watching on YouTube, you can see all the neat visuals that Mike brought today. Mike, how if people want to know more about your process and what is, I know you have a process and it you have sort of, I don't know if it's patented or whatever, but I mean you've created a system, and what's that called?
it's called the decoding grid because it becomes like once you gather the values and the order, you apply
Uh,
them like a visual decoding grid to a relationship.
Great.
Mhm.
So, if somebody wants to find out more about the decoding grid and more about you and get in touch with you, what is the best way for them to do that?
So it's to go to my website, which is called getabsoluteClarity.com. So
Perfect.
getabsoluteClarity.com, all the three words at once.com. And there they will be able to find my book called Divorce Decision Decoded. They will be able also to find out how I work with clients and to schedule a clarity session if they're interested in being guided through the process step by step. This really has become a labor of love and a life mission to share the process. So if you're listening to the podcast, go because you'll learn something valuable. I wrote the book to just have people use it with or without me, doesn't matter. But I really feel that I have found this valuable process. And if you want to solve the Rubik cube nowadays, you go online and look at the videos that teach you how to do this. Well, go
Or
to
you
get
watch a 4-year-old.
and you'll be able to solve your indecision and have a better life.
That's beautiful. Thank you, Mike, so much for being here today. It was a pleasure talking to you, and I really appreciate the simplicity of this and how it can be applied to a very complicated, a very emotional decision. So, thank you very much for coming up with the grid. I love that.
Thank you so much for having me, Sue. It was a pleasure being your guest.
Okay, you can be the host now. All right,
Well,
we'll
it was an interesting conversation. It went both ways. We were both hosts and guests. There we go.
Right, right. All right, Mike, thank you so much. And I'll put all of your information and how people can get in contact with you in the show notes. And have a fantastic day. Thank you.
You too, Sue. Goodbye.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of A Life Worth Being. I hope you found it fun and inspiring. And to avoid a bad case of FOMO, please be sure to click that subscribe button. If you love what you heard today, please share it with a friend and then hop on over to your favorite podcast platform and return the love with a wonderful review and 5-star rating. It would truly mean the world to me. Be sure to follow me on Instagram and on my website, links below in the show notes. I appreciate you, and I will see you next week for more fresh insights on awakening a life worth being.